go. Hi, everybody. It's Wendy Murdoch, and we are here with Webinars with Wendy. Today, my guest is Sarah Louise Lilley, namesake of my cat. And she's going to talk to us about EFT. So welcome, Sarah. This is so much fun to talk about EFT and talk about somebody who's like from my old neck of the woods, New England. I'm hoping to get back there I'll be in New York. But anyway, welcome. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here.
So, Sarah, just tell us a little bit about your background and before we get into EFT, like, have you always been a horse girl? What's the deal?
Yes. So I grew up in England, the south of England. I had my first riding lesson when I was 10. And it was the age-old story of, once I had that first lesson, I never wanted to leave. And I would ride every Saturday. Every other Saturday, I'd be kind of doing flat work in the indoor. And then in the other Saturdays, we'd be kind of let loose on the Sussex Downs. And we'd trot through these beautiful little country towns. And then we would just kind of gallop along these like rolling hills. And it was just magic. I just lived for those Saturdays. It was like just waiting for those Saturdays. And so for me, like horses, nature, outdoors are very much linked because of that, I think. And then fast forward, when I was in the middle of high school, my parents moved to the States. We moved to New Jersey. And then it was a very traumatic move, I think, for all of us. But horse riding was very expensive here. And my parents couldn't really afford to give me lessons here. So then I found a small private boarding facility. And on the weekends, I would muck stalls out in exchange for exercising this semi-retired Morgan horse. So I'd ride her. And then kind of 20s, 30s, I would always tell people that horses was, my favorite thing to do in the world. But really, I wasn't really doing it regularly, right? I was doing it kind of on vacation, a handful of times a year. And it wasn't until there was a big trauma in my own life, which I'm sure we'll get to at some point, that was one of those big kind of tomorrow's not guaranteed, right? Like, what am I waiting for? Like, why am I not prioritizing the one thing that, I say I love to do the most? And so then I really recommitted to my horse journey. That was 6 years ago. Fast forward, end of 2023, I bought my first horse in my 40s. So it's never too late to get that first pony. So that's my horse journey.
Yeah, awesome. So you have your own horse now?
I do, Luna.
Oh, it's a great name. And you ride in Jersey?
Yeah, so I go to Penwick Sports Horses. It's an eventing barn in Newton, New Jersey. It's stunning. It's got a beautiful cross-country course. It's got trails. I don't know how many acres it is, but it's huge. And it's a really wonderful, supportive, just intimate barn. It's a really just...
Awesome. That's really...
Yeah, just a really supportive place, right? There's so many people I know. I have clients who struggle with, or they talk about like toxic barn culture is a thing, right? And I'm so grateful that I have such a supportive home. So
awesome. All right. So what are we going to talk about today?
So I want to talk about EFT for equestrians specifically. Why I think it's so helpful for equestrians. And, many people may be familiar with EFT, but frankly, what is EFT, right? Because some people may not be familiar with it.
Start with what does EFT stand for?
Yes. So EFT stands for Emotional Freedom Techniques. It's also called tapping. At its simplest, it's a stress reduction tool, right? It combines elements of modern Western psychology with the ancient art of acupressure. It's also called tapping because you're using your fingers to tap on these acupressure points on your face and torso. And what the science shows us is you're sending a calming signal to your amygdala, to your fight or flight response. So study shows you're lowering your cortisol, the unwanted emotion around whatever event you're tapping on starts to dissipate. You're actually rewiring your brain around that past event. So now you can show up in your present from a calm, centered place, as opposed to coming from a reactive, triggered, or habitual place.
Sounds like something we all need right now.
Yes. I mean, just right as just an emotional regulation tool for everyday life. Like, who doesn't need that tool, right? And it literally requires your fingertips. Like, that's all it requires. So it's very simple and it's very practical.
Awesome. Okay. So what is the background? I mean, where did EFT come from?
It's a great question. So I think in the 60s, right, there started to be this real interest in sort of acupressure and acupuncture, right? There was the famous story in the 60s of Nixon going over to China and seeing someone have some basic surgery using acupuncture, right, as opposed to kind of anesthesia.
That.
Yeah. So that kind of started this whole obsession around the power of acupressure, right?
Yeah.
And then people started realizing, I love it. And then people started realizing, wow, we can get some of the same effects by just using pressure and not actually using needles, right? So there was a chiropractor, Goodhart, I believe. He was really instrumental in kind of that kind of process. Roger Callahan in the 70s, 80s, he had a very famous case where he was a psychologist and he was just experimenting with doing some tapping. And he was working with a client who had an incredibly strong phobia of water. And as they were talking and having a session, they were using some acupressure, right? Using some tapping points. And the next day she called him and said, my phobia is gone. And he was like, don't be ridiculous. Like, of course it's not. But she came over to his house and basically got in his pool. It's a very famous case of like a phobia kind of disappearing by magic, if you will. But through the power of acupressure and tapping, right? And then in the timeline, sort of the 90s, Gary Craig wrote the first EFT manual. And now fast forward, one of my mentors, Dawson Church, Peter Stapleton, they are really leading the charge to have clinical data, clinical trials, articles in peer-reviewed journals to prove the efficacy of EFT, right? To have the data behind what practitioners have known for a long time, but to have that kind of scientific data behind it to prove why and how it works. So
I think it's so fascinating because we knew about calculus long before we knew how it worked. We knew about error long before we understood what it was, and yet so many people remain skeptical of things until there is that scientific data.
Yes.
And it just seems to be so delayed in comparison to the actual use of or benefit from a variety of techniques. Yeah.
And I've heard you talk about it with surefoot pads too, right? It's like, we know it works. Like the horses, it's undeniable. Right. I've heard you talk about how you're excited to get some kind of data behind it and sort of, scientific piece too, for that same reason of some people really want kind of the data and the why and the proof, the scientific proof of why it works, right? And so it's helpful.
Right. And things like this, they're not easy to research because you have to control so many factors and figure out something that you can actually measure, so just the very nature of a scientific study kind of, I don't know what the word for it is, but it affects the actual experiment because you have to like control so many things. So I'm just interesting that they're
I think I can really nerd out about the scientific studies and I find it quite fascinating. I'll just highlight a couple. So 1 hour of EFT we know drops our cortisol by 43%.
Wow.
Right? So almost in half, right? When we use functional MRIs, we can see the stress centers of the brain. We can see the rapid deactivation of those stress centers of the brain, right? We can literally see the stress leaving your brain as people are tapping. Peter Stapleton recently worked with Stephen Porges.
Oh, cool.
And so now we can prove that EFT, right, actually increases vagal tone. So now we know that it increases vagal tone. There's so many great studies. They've done studies. One more. I'll squeeze one more in.
Yeah.
They've done studies around like with epigenetics and really using EFT to kind of track sort of epigenetic tags. So even EFT affects gene expression, right? So there's it's wild how the trials and they have about it. So anyone can go to PubMed.gov, right? And really kind of nerd out. But I'll hold back. I'm talking fast. I got really excited.
Well, no, these are really interesting studies that you're talking about, and involving Stephen Porges, because he's been at the forefront of, the whole polyvagal theory and how do we help people with PTSD and that sort of thing. So I think that that's really interesting, and the fact that they can do MRI. Like, the problem with horses is that you're limited in so many ways as to what you can actually do, just the sheer numbers and costs and et cetera, et cetera. But, with people, it's a little bit easier in that respect. So that's really, really cool. So when you go to PubMed, what I'm just going to go there right now. What is it that I want to put in as a
if you just put EFT in there, and it'll come up. There's they do a lot of EFT in the hospital chain, Kaiser Permanente. So there's practice guidelines in there for Kaiser Permanente.
There's tons
there's practice guidelines for working with veterans, because we've done a lot of EFT work with veterans and the PTSD community who struggle with that post, if you're a veteran. So there's all sorts of deep dives and studies you can look at there.
So I'm going to pop a link in here if anybody's really interested in nerding out on this stuff, because there is tons, actually.
Yeah.
Cool. Really cool. Okay. So now let's bring it back down to the the day-to-day level. We geeked out on somebody's asked me how it can change genetics. And I think that there's, I think you're talking about gene expression as a
exactly. Yes, exactly. Exactly. So we used to think that you have your genes and now you're stuck with it, and whatever you have in your gene means you're going to get the thing, right?
Right.
And now we know that, trauma, stress, environment, toxins, right, can really affect that gene expression. So it's not a sort of a sentence anymore. It might be expressed, and but we can also, we do have the ability and somewhat to kind of turn on and off the expressions of these genes. And EFT is something that can turn on things for immunity, but turn off the negative expression, right? So it gives you some freedom there.
Yeah, because, recently, I don't know if you've heard of a book called Dirty Genes. And recently somebody gave me that book, and it talks about, if you have certain genetic expression, there's things you can do about it, right?
Yeah.
You're not just stuck, if you will. It's so interesting. We used to think it was like you turn 21, if you drink alcohol, you're killing off your brain cells.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Like that's a myth. And so there's so much that we are discovering, I think, in this department, especially about expression versus it's all on or off.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
So I think that's really cool that it doesn't have to be like, okay, so let's get into it. Okay. Like I'm blathering.
I love it. I'm so excited. I love it.
All right. Do you want to do your screen share? Or
yeah, let's do it. Let's talk about why it's good for, let's do it. Do this. And we're going to go there. And we're going to go here. There we go. So EFT for equestrians. So for me, there's kind of four main reasons why I think it's so helpful for the equestrian community. I think, first of all, there's so much unrecognized trauma in the industry, and people don't have tools to move past it, right? A lot of my clients come to me just having been told to kind of push through it or think positive, and they just get more and more frustrated. And we know, right, the body keeps the score. Trauma does not live in your head, it lives in your body, and you really need a somatic tool to move that trauma out of your body. So I think that's why EFT is so helpful. Emotions run really high in the equestrian community. And that's only because horses mean everything to us, right? And so whether, you're someone who struggles kind of really beating yourself up after a bad ride, or, maybe your horse has an injury and the future kind of looks really uncertain and it feels really scary. Or God forbid you lose a horse and that grief feels so big that having a tool to support you just moving through and being with these big emotions, I think is really supportive. Obviously, performance anxiety is very common if you're a rider that competes. And I think what makes EFT different is that it really gets to the root cause of that performance anxiety, right? It's not just a surface layer piece. It really gets to the root cause and what's holding that performance anxiety in place, which we can release with EFT. And finally, horses are sensitive, right? We know how they can hear our heartbeat. They can regulate off us. We can co-regulate off them. They can dysregulate off us. So even if you're just someone who gets to the barn and you're just feeling really tired, right? Or maybe you just had kind of a crummy day at work, to take a moment to release that stress out of your body somatically, just to kind of come back to your center. So you can kind of come to your horse with that neutral, calm, kind of supportive energy, I think is super helpful. And I'd love to kind of just talk people through kind of the framework that I take clients through, right? It's not necessarily in this order. Some clients spend more time in one area than another, but I kind of have a framework that I would love to kind of walk people through or just talk through. So these are kind of commonalities that a lot of my clients share. They feel that, anxiety is just taking all the fun out of their horse journey, right? They're really frustrated and tired that they keep having this experience of being kind of hijacked by their nervous system. And they know horses are a part of their journey, but they're supposed to be a source of joy, right? And they're not supposed to be this source of stress. So I'll talk you through this framework. We'll talk about the first mistake equestrians make when reconnecting to their confidence. We'll talk about how to release the root cause of your anxious thinking and why a positive mindset isn't enough.
Well, and I think it, just to kind of stop for a second.
Yeah.
So many people try to, for lack of a better word, pretend that they're okay.
Yeah.
Right. Like they're anxious and they're nervous. And I think it's in so many ways, we're like horses in that we compensate. And so, we might feel a little anxious, but we compensate by either, making up stories about the horse, making up stories about our own riding, making excuses for that, and not actually being genuinely acknowledging what's going on because it's not either socially acceptable or not, environment, whatever. But I think that that's such a big piece, is that it's just getting somebody to be honest enough with themselves to say that they have anxiety. I see that quite a bit, actually.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think it's just there's so much shame around it, right? And I also think people think, I'll talk about it in a moment, they don't realize what they went through was actually traumatic. So then they feel stupid, or they feel like they shouldn't make a big deal about it, or they shouldn't feel the anxiety. Yeah. So then they don't want to admit it. It's not that they don't want to tell, it's just they feel like they shouldn't feel it. So they don't want to accept it because they feel shame, or they feel embarrassed, or they think, oh, so-and-so had a much worse fall than me and they're fine. Like, why am I struggling? And I didn't even break anything. Right. Right. And so I think a lot of it is just around a misunderstanding around why they're feeling this way, right?
But I mean, I think there's this whole piece about vulnerability, and horses compensate so that they're not appearing vulnerable, and they will compensate like crazy until they can't. And I actually believe that people do the same thing for the same reasons. And it's that vulnerability, whether it's vulnerable to the peers, our associates, our peers, our horse, our parent, whatever, that we kind of. And we're often told, that we're not supposed to feel that way.
Yeah. I really, that hit in my heart when you said about not wanting to appear vulnerable. Right. And I guess I feel like one of my missions is to normalize. Yeah. It's okay to feel anxious. It makes sense. You feel this way. Of course you feel anxious. Right. So, I just really want to normalize it. It's okay to feel vulnerable. Right. Let's normalize that. Right. We're in a sport that is dangerous.
It has risk. It has inherent risk. Period.
And it's okay to sometimes be anxious, and we can also give ourselves tools so it doesn't take the fun out. It doesn't take the fun away. We're not in the experience of our anxiety is running the show or taking the joy away. But yes, sometimes we get anxious, and if you're really struggling, there are tools we can do so you can feel more empowered and not feel that way anymore.
Yeah, cool.
So I think this is a perfect segue, because I want to talk about what actually makes something traumatic, right? So for me, there are 4 characteristics that might make your brain encode an event as traumatic, right? So a threat or perceived threat to your physical safety, overwhelming your capacity to cope, producing a sense of powerlessness, right? Feeling isolated or alone, and violating your expectations, right? So even per our conversation, if you imagine, right, you get kicked by a horse, it's a threat to your physical safety. It probably felt like it came out of nowhere. So it violated your expectations. And, maybe you told your trainer about it and she was like, well, you probably shouldn't have done that. Or I don't know. It hasn't happened to me. I don't know. And now you feel that shame and you feel alone, right? So even if, you tell yourself like, oh, I wasn't hurt that bad, or I'm fine. I didn't hurt myself. I'm fine, right? From a nervous system perspective, if these characteristics are met, it might not matter, right? So yeah, I just really want to normalize that's what is happening. And so if you're kicked, if these things happen, and if you're having a reaction that feels out of control, that's actually normal from a nervous system perspective, but we can have tools to move past it.
Well, and I think that everybody's nervous system is a little bit different in terms of
yes.
the sensitivity level, I guess is probably the best way to say it,
Yeah.
Some people would be more sensitive to one of those more than someone else.
100%. Yeah, 100%. I love this quote. Trauma is not what happens to you, it's what happens inside you, which is a good thing, because if trauma is what happened to you, right, we can't unhappen that. But if trauma is the wound you're carrying, that we can heal.
Cool. That's a good quote.
Isn't that good? Oh, I love it. So this is kind of the framework that I walk clients through with EFT. And fearless, I just want to highlight, doesn't mean there will never be fear, right? EFT is not actually about getting rid of emotions. It's building capacity to be with any emotion that comes up. So it's really about changing your relationship to your emotions and really owning your emotions so they don't own you.
And can I interject here? Because
yeah, of course, anytime.
I think that this is a really important aspect of, it's not that you're never going to feel fear, but you won't be afraid of feeling fear.
Yes. You'll build. Yeah, exactly.
Well, because, I see so often where people try to like desensitize, and I'm not a fan of desensitizing a horse, because you're not teaching them to be fearless. You're teaching them that one thing.
Yeah.
But and what I like to do is to develop a horse's resilience so that he can evaluate and trust, right, the person he's with, so that he doesn't have to react in fear. And I think so many people want their horses not to be fearful, and that's just never going to happen.
Yeah, 100%.
In a healthy horse, like when we were down in Costa Rica, these horses, motorcycles, dogs, beaches, water, everything, but they've learned that these are all things that happen in their environment, and everybody's like cool with it because they have learned that it's okay. They're not desensitized to it. They have experienced it and understood it as not a threat.
Yeah.
And I, this is where I see so many people try to, try to take the fear out of the horse. You need that. That's really important. Self-preservation is a really key thing, and fear is how we do self-preservation.
Yeah, 100%. And the same for humans, right? Like life is always going to happen. There's always going to be stress. Life will happen. But as you said, we can build that vagal tone so we can come back to our center with more and more ease, that we're not knocked off course for so long without being able to come back to our center.
Right.
Yeah, cool. For sure. So the first, let me share screen again. My first pillar here is resourcing, which is just a tool to resource yourself with calm and peace, right? It's always the first kind of skill I teach clients, because it feels really, well, first, I don't want anyone exploring their trauma without having a tool to access safety if they need it. But it really feels like a superpower, right? It feels empowering knowing you have this skill to access calm and safety in the nervous system if you need it. I love bilateral tapping. That's my kind of favorite tool, but there's lots of other tools. Before EFT, I used to really feel like emotions would get like trapped in my body. I didn't know how to get them out. I could be stuck in these funks for kind of days. But EFT really kind of gives you control back so you can choose how you show up as opposed to coming from that reactive, triggered, habitual place. And what I want to highlight, kind of it relates to our conversation too, is that we can work out our nervous system just like we work out our cardiovascular or muscular system, right? Your nervous system is always looking for cues of safety or cues of danger. And the more we do these micro habits, moments of bilateral tapping or resourcing, you're building that vagal tone. So again, life will happen, stress will happen, but you'll come back with more and more ease. And that's really what I feel like, my short-foot pads do for my horse too, right? Like in the same way that I'm mechanically tapping on my body, I'm giving her a pad, she's standing on it, and she's coming into that, parasympathetic nervous system. And the more I do pads with her, the quicker and quicker she gets to that place, right? The first time I did pads, she was like, took a little while. And I've heard you tell that great story about a horse you work with that, would see the orange pad from a few feet away and would start yawning, right? So it's like horses, we can build that resilience and build those cues of safety so we can build that resilience.
Yeah. And I think that is so important to recognize that it is a skill. It is a skill we can learn. It's a skill we can develop. And that people who have more of this skill have probably had more practice.
Yes. And you practice it when you don't need it too, right? And again, it can be a micro habit. You could do it for a minute, 2 minutes a day, right? Like very small. It doesn't have to be this huge, big practice, but it really does make a huge difference.
Right. And in learning anything, and I think this is, you alluded to Surefoot, and I think it's the same here. When you're learning something, you've got to spend some time to learn it, to learn how to do it.
Yeah.
And that's actually, where you kind of invest. You're investing in yourself. You're investing in the ability to figure out, okay, how does this work and what do I do? But once you have a skill, it's like you have the skill of eating with a spoon. You have the skill of making a cup of coffee, right?
Yeah. So my second kind of pillar that I think is a huge piece, and we kind of alluded to that earlier about just kind of accepting what the feeling and experience you're having, right, is acceptance, which is just releasing resistance to what is. And the irony of change, it ties in beautifully to what you were saying earlier. The irony of change is you can't go anywhere without accepting where you are, right? I heard this quote the other day from Brad Yates, and he was talking about when you're in your car and you're getting, Google directions to get to where you're going, Google cannot help you unless you put in where you are, right? Unless you give Google exactly where you are now, it cannot help you get to where you're going. And it's the same with acceptance, right? You have to accept where you are first. That's the first step towards moving forward, right? I love this Carl Rogers quote. And it just feels like, I think acceptance can feel good. You don't have to like it where you're at, right? But it really is about surrendering and just kind of putting the boxing gloves down, right? Just accepting the facts of the moment. And without it, you just end up in that kind of judgment, shame spiral, that stuckness that we alluded to earlier. I was actually my first EFT equestrian client. So I alluded to this big trauma in my own life. I came back to horses, and pretty quickly, unfortunately, I broke my finger while I was riding. And it wasn't a big deal. It didn't hurt. I didn't fall. I was off for like 6 weeks. I came back. And now suddenly, out of nowhere, I had this this low-level anxiety that I couldn't shake. And it was so frustrating because I'm finally riding again. And now I have this anxiety that's taking all the fun out of it, right? I didn't know what was going on. I couldn't figure it out. It was so annoying. And it wasn't until, and when I first tapped on that, right, the first thing I tapped on was not the anxiety, but all the feelings I had about having the anxiety, right? And so releasing, I was already feeling anxious, but I'd layered on all this shame, all this frustration. And once I kind of processed that, it opened the door to compassion, opened the door to acceptance. And that was the first step towards moving forward.
I think that's so true.
I mean, it feels counterintuitive, right? Because it feels like if I accept it, it's going to never leave, or if I accept it, it's going to get worse. But the opposite is true. And I feel like there's so much about EFT that can feel counterintuitive, but it is the first step towards change, which is accepting where you're at, right?
Yeah.
So rewiring the brain, which EFT does so beautifully. When we have unprocessed trauma, right? It's just hanging there, waiting to re-trigger you. But with EFT, we can go back, we can rewire the brain around that past event so you're no longer triggered.
And I think that this is an interesting point, because sometimes we don't even realize how habitually triggered we are. In other words, it's so familiar.
Yes.
That we don't even recognize it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so, that awareness of seeing being able to see a pattern.
Yeah. And also even just something that's, sometimes we have these little trauma responses that we just think, like, I'll use a very silly example for my life that's unhorse related, but to illustrate the point, I used to hate being late. And I just thought, well, I don't like being late, right? That's a very good thing. No one wants being late. It's respectful to be on time, right? Like, I hate being late. But when I was on beginning the night tapping journey, I realized, thinking back to it, that I had this disproportional response to being late. Like, there would be moments with my son, for example, when he was little, like when he was 3 years old or something. And we're just going to a play date where it literally makes no difference if we're 5 minutes late, because we're going to like a playground and it makes zero difference. But I would get like, oh my God, we're going to be late. This is hot, like this huge response. And when I discovered tapping and I'm just kind of going through my life and figuring out what's in alignment and what's not, I really suddenly got that is a trauma response for me. Like, in my household, I grew up in a very strict family. It was not safe for me to be late, right? So it's not that I don't really like being late, and I'm still mostly on time because I think it's a respectful thing. But I realized that is a trauma response for me. And in my nervous system, the reason my response was so disproportionate was that it was not safe for me to be late. Because when I was a kid, if I was late, it was not good, right? So things like that reminds me of what you said, of just realizing where the distinction between like safety in the nervous system as a trigger, right? So
yeah, no, it's so much of our reactions are around not feeling safe.
Yes.
But we don't realize that's the issue.
Yes. 100%. Yeah. 100%.
Okay.
So rewiring the brain. So clients often tell me, right? Oh, my body's so out of control. I don't know what's happening. I'm fine at the walk and trot, and suddenly I canter and I like have panic attacks, right? And I always tell them, your body's not out of control. Your body is a badass at keeping you safe, right? There's a lack of safety in the nervous system, and your body is doing its hardest to keep you safe, trying to protect you. Don't do this thing, right? But with EFT, again, we can go back. We can bring safety to the nervous system around that past event. So in your present, you can show up very differently.
Well, this is what's so interesting, because horses by nature have risk, right? Unsafe risk. And yet this is what we want to do. And then we bring it's like,
I know, it's a very paradoxical. Yeah. I mean, it's funny. I broke my shoulder a couple of years ago, and all of my non-equestrian friends, family members, after I broke my shoulder, were like, oh, so I guess you're not riding anymore. And I was like, no, of course I'm riding again. Yeah. I mean, I can't ride right now, but of course I'll ride again. Right. So the people outside of our world are like, why would you, what? Why would you even you broke your shoulder. Why would you keep doing it? And, so yeah. And I think there has to be, there's an element of, we have to accept that, right? Like it's, it is part of it for sure.
Right. But there's lots of other things that have risk, so there is something about the thrill and the risk and the safety factor that it's kind of salt, sugar, fat, right? It's got to be just the right proportion for your individual nervous system. So cool.
Yeah. It's calculated risk, right? Yeah. It's like, it's worth it at the level. Yeah. 100%. So when we release the trauma, right, we're releasing the fear. So in my experience, when I trace back my anxiety that I had after I broke my finger, it actually I traced back that emotional signature in my body. It traced back to unresolved trauma around what happened to me several years earlier, around this big trauma in my own life. And when I resolved that, I was able to show up differently in my present, right? So my body had actually connected to completely different things. My body had kind of connected. You could be riding along and like out of nowhere, like you could break your finger, to this other event in my life several years earlier where it was like, I don't have to go into that, but like something very big happened out of nowhere. And it re-triggered that kind of out of nowhere feeling in my body. But again, once I processed that unprocessed piece, it allowed me to show up very differently in my present. And I think, unfortunately, what happens with a lot of these lack of safety in the nervous system, these activations in the nervous system, is over time, it typically gets worse and not better, right? Because the more you kind of tell your nervous system, you're not safe, it's not good, this is unsafe, you're making those neural pathways like neural highways, and I have so many clients who, I had one client who had a really, really scary fall, like worst case scenario fall. And she came to me and she was having very kind of typical, like late onset PTSD, right? She was having intrusive thoughts in the middle of the day about what happened. She was having kind of flashbacks. She was having nightmares about what happened. And, she felt like she'd lost a part of herself. She was considering selling her horse. She just didn't know. She felt so lost in it, had no idea kind of how to get it back, right? So I guess really what I want to normalize, if anyone's listening and that is you, that this is a solvable problem, right? We just want to go back with a tool like EFT and kind of really resolve that past trauma and somatically really process it out of your body so you can show up in your present very differently. And certainly in my journey, when I released that trauma, it gave me back that joy and connection I loved around horses that, I was really struggling to find. So this is my fourth pillar, kind of embodiment. So embodiment just means feeling into your future vision somatically with all 5 senses. So trauma is something that happens in your past that affects your present and how you see yourself in the future, right? Trauma makes one kind of sweeping generalization, right? Your horse spooked on the trail. He will always spook on the trail. Trails are unsafe, right? Trauma turns one moment into the truth. So there's no toxic positivity here. We have to kind of rewire the brain first, right? Release that trauma, process that out of your body. But then sometimes it's not enough just to kind of think about the future. We really want to feel into it. And again, going back to safety, give your nervous system a roadmap of safety so that the vision you want for yourself is both possible and safe, right? Or feels safe to the nervous system. Right? I had a client who had lost a horse and she was just really struggling, right? And we processed that grief and she was feeling just so much lighter and she felt ready to find a new partner. But she just felt like she didn't have any confidence. She didn't have any clarity. And it wasn't until we really kind of felt into that future vision, we embodied that future possibility, that it gave her the clarity and the confidence she needed to move forward. I think she ended up buying a horse something like like 2 days after that session or something,
Oh,
which is kind of amazing. And then the final piece I want to cover is new habits, right? We all have parts of us that we're, not such a fan of. A lot of my clients struggle with, people-pleasing parts or perfectionist parts, and I certainly resonate with both of those as well. But all parts of us served a protective function at some point, right? And when we understand, the when and the why of their creation, we can just have so much more compassion for them and cultivate habits to kind of communicate with them more effectively. I talked earlier about when I broke my shoulder riding, and coming back to riding was actually really easy. I have lots of tools, but when I would be in the tack room, just like putting my boots on, ever so once in a while, I'd hear this kind of little voice that was kind of like, you broke your shoulder doing this. I don't know if this is a good idea, right? And I would just hold space for that part of me, right? Like, I get it. Yes, that was scary. Of course you don't want to do that again. I don't want to do that again. I don't want to break my shoulder again, right? Just holding space for that fear, again, which feels so counterintuitive. But these parts of us, they don't want advice. They don't want to be told, like, don't be scared, go away, stop talking to me, don't be scared, you're silly, right? They just want to be seen and heard, like all of us. And the irony is, the more you can hold space for them, the less and less they show up, right? Suddenly it's like, oh, that's weird. Now I think about it, right? I haven't heard that voice in 3 years. So again, it feels really counterintuitive, but we really want to hold space for these parts of us. Otherwise, you're just trapped in the past, right? You're trapped in that outdated programming, right? Maybe you're a barn owner who's really burnt out, right? And you keep finding yourself like, I'm exhausted. Why did I suddenly agree again to teach an extra lesson when I told myself I wouldn't do that, right? You just end up kind of trapped in these really what are survival skills, right? These protective functions. But unless you really release the root cause of those survival skills, you end up just kind of trapped in that spiral. And we want to release it. So again, you can cultivate new ways to kind of communicate with these parts of you. So that's really kind of the framework, that I walk clients through. And again, not necessarily in this order. Sometimes we're spending more time on one area than another. But yeah, that's the framework I work clients through. I'd love to, what questions are coming up for you, Wendy? I have a great little intro I'll talk about later, so I'll make sure I do that at the end.
So it's really interesting, and how do I put this? There are certain unalienable principles that keep coming up over and over, right, in all these different disciplines and in all these different ways, and I think you put it very succinctly. But Feldenkrais would talk about you can't do what you want until you know what you do. Right. We talk about we act in accordance to our own self-image. So there's they're worded slightly differently, and they come from and everybody hears it a little bit different. But every time you turn around, it's like there's this consistent messaging about how we can be in the world, I guess is probably the best way to say it.
Yeah, I love how you said that. Yeah, that acceptance piece I think is so important. And I would agree with that. It's amazing how, as you said, different modalities, we're all kind of saying the same thing. It's just worded differently. And I like how you put that. Yeah.
But it keeps coming back to this concept of safety being number one. And sometimes we don't even realize that we're not offering ourselves safety. Right? Like just listening to you, I was like, wow, like I've been anxious about something that's been going on here. And it's like, why am I feeling? Because it's a threat to me. It doesn't make me feel safe. So that's just kind of interesting to, and Stephen Porges' work is all about vagus nerve, which is all about, do I feel safe? And is so much about, do I feel safe? This very, very basic, yet primitive, yet powerful, yet not primitive, there's so many nuances to it.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, I think the invitation is always to get out of the head into the body, right? Even I caught myself the other day, I had a ride that like wasn't, it wasn't great. It was fine. I was a little disappointed, right? And what the instinct is we feel disappointment, and that feels like a little bit of a threat. We don't like feeling that, and that feels uncomfortable, right? Yeah. And so then what happens is your brain, again, really trying to help, is like, well, you're a bad rider and you're not as good as so-and-so and you're never going to get what you want, and starts making meaning out of that feeling, that sensation.
Yeah,
right?
yes, that's exactly it.
You make meaning and you're spiraling. You're like, oh my God, I'm never going to get where I'm going. And I want to do that show and that's never going to happen. And she's writing so well. Look at me. I'm the worst. I'm the worst writer of the planet, right? You spiral in.
Yeah.
Right. And as I was just like, oh my God, I'm so spiraling right now. So I'm like driving home and I'm just tapping. And then it's like, it stops. You leave the brain. You just get into the body. And all I was left with was, yeah, I had a bad ride. It was disappointing. Of course I'm a little disappointed. That's okay. I can just sit with that. I can just observe that. I'm a little disappointed. Yeah. I would love every ride to be magical. And you know what? Sometimes it doesn't happen, and it's a little disappointing, and that's okay. But it's when we start making meaning of the unwanted feeling, that's when we get ourselves into trouble. So for me, the invitation
such a good way to look at it. That's so fantastic, because that's it's exactly what you see, is that people start putting stories, I call it stories, meaning around the emotion, instead of just, it is what it is. It just is, right?
Yeah. And I'm more than this feeling. I can just sit with it and be with it. So I think that's one of the first tools I teach clients too, is just like, okay, whatever's happening, it's like, just where do you feel that in your body? I feel like this butterfly, or even like nervousness. You think it before like doing something, right? Nervousness. I've butterflies in my belly. Great. Let's just tune into that. Just be with that. Don't make it mean you're going to do terribly. Don't make it mean. Just where is that sensation? And I don't think what people realize is if we do calm the body, the brain does follow, right? We think we can fix it in the mind. We think we can fix it by thinking our way out of it and like fixing it in the brain, but that's never the answer. The answer is like calm the body, the brain will follow.
Okay. So somebody's asked about, she says, so you just think of something and tap your head, ?
Excellent point. Excellent point. I'll show you. I have a slide with the tapping points, so I can show you. Kind of the main tapping points. Excellent point. We didn't actually talk about like what tapping looks like. So I think that's an excellent point you raised, Katie. So thank you for that. Let me share my screen for this. So these are the basic tapping points. So there are other alternate points, but these are kind of the basic recipe, if you will. And what tapping really looks like is we tap it's, as I said, it's a mix of cognitive therapy and acupressure, right? So tapping looks like what a session would look like, or what we're actually doing is we're always starting on the side of the hand. We're tapping 3 statements there, which is always just about acknowledging what is, right? I'm feeling anxious. I have compassion for myself, or I'm feeling anxious in my body, but I'm more than this feeling, right? Whatever language you're going to use. And then we're just focusing on that unwanted sensation in the body, that whatever we're tapping on, and we're just tapping through these points. So there's 9 basic recipe tapping points, which cover the 12 main meridians in your body. So that's kind of what the tapping looks like in a session if you work with someone, or you can tap by yourself, of course, too. And again, we're sending signals to the amygdala. We're sending these calming signals to the nervous system, which is, again, dropping you into your body, getting you out of your head into your body, and rewiring your brain about whatever you're tapping on. So I use the silly example of, the having a bad ride, right? It's like, I'm getting out of my head. Where do I feel that first, that disappointment? I'm just tapping through it. After one round, it's like, yeah, I just feel disappointed, and that's okay. And all the story and all that piece of it has kind of, I'm able to let that go because I've calmed my nervous system. Did that make sense?
Yeah. And I think let me see if I can put this together. So it's a combination of the awareness and the observation with the tapping, which is affecting acupuncture points, acupressure points, and the meridians to release the emotional whatever that is held in the body. And
exactly.
that, it's interesting to see your little, can you put your little chart back up again?
Yeah.
Because so many of these points we unconsciously touch.
Yes, 100%. Oh my goodness, I love
right. So like if anybody
100%.
has ever done any Linda Tellington Jones mouth work and know how she talks about right here under the nose, or people who rub their chin, or when we start rubbing our eyes, we're unconsciously. And I think the piece here that's so important is the consciously influencing these points in an acknowledged way, as opposed to an unconscious way.
Yes. I love that you brought that up, Wendy. So yeah, when you think about it, tapping is just systematizing what our body knows naturally to do. Exactly as you said, when you're stressed, you're like, oh my God, what am I going to do? Right? Like we naturally know to like put pressure on these points. We're like, oh my God, I'm shocked. Oh my God, what am I going to do? Right? We naturally know to do this. So now we're just systematizing what our body knows to do. And as we're focusing on something traumatic, right? We're talking about it out loud. We don't even need to talk about it. We're just focusing on it. We're focusing on it. But then we're sending these calming signals to the nervous system. And it's almost like your brain can't handle that dissonance, right? So it's like, oh, I guess we're okay. And it will rewire around that event or whatever you're focusing on.
So Dawn just said she found tapping so helpful in 23 and 24, which enabled her to start riding her horse again. It's a useful and easy tool to use in life. And I think that's one of the keys with EFT is that it's not overly complicated.
Yes.
I think that you could probably think of it as, I think of Feldenkrais in the same way. You can do the kitchen sink stuff, read the book, tap, or you can go deeper and work with someone who is trained in tapping.
Yes, 100%. I mean, even if you did nothing but just tap the points, right? Sometimes I do an exercise where you're just kind of tuning into your body. You just tap through the points once. And just that alone, it's like, oh my God, I can take a bigger breath. My body feels more present. I feel like I'm taking up more space in my body. So just tapping the points alone, you're going to get some of that nervous system release, right? And then, yes, of course, like if you work with someone, you can really get to the root cause of something and really have quite dramatic sometimes results in terms of, getting to the root of a fear, a block, a trauma.
Yeah. And I think the key there is depending on the intensity of the fears, often people need a facilitator to help them guide them through that process.
Yeah, 100%.
It's been a long time ago now, but I can recall a student and she went and worked with someone and it just really shifted her that we just couldn't get her to shift. And she went and did some work on this and it really made a difference.
Yeah. I think when you're in session with someone, you're also using that practitioner to co-regulate, right, off them. They're co-regulating you. There's also an element of, again, safety, where if you're with someone and they're holding space in a powerful way, it allows your nervous system to feel safe enough to surrender and go into things, right, in a very safe way. And I also think we want to go really slowly with the nervous system. And sometimes, again, coming from the best intentions, we want to like deep dive in there and get into that trauma and fix it and like get in there, right? And that is not what the nervous system needs, right? The nervous system actually wants to go super easily and gently. And I think working with a practitioner also allows someone to guide you to go at the speed that your nervous system actually is supportive to your nervous system, as opposed to like going in too fast. Which again, as a type A person, I understand that urge, but we actually want to go kind of slowly and gently. So.
Right. And it's a skill. Again, it's a skill. Once you learn a skill, you have that skill. You can use that skill wherever you are and wherever you go.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I'm definitely, if you ever see someone walking around the streets of New York, just tapping, that'll be me. Because I'll just be like, oh, random thought. Let me tap on that. So.
Cool. So, how does one decide if one can just, where can one find resources to learn more?
Yeah, well, I have, anyone who's interested, I have a 10-minute audio tapping audio designed specially for equestrians. You can just go to my website, Emotional Freedom with Sarah. It's right there on the top.
Wait. We need to. Can you type that into the chat?
Yes, I will. It's designed to really center and calm you before you work with your horse, whether you ride your horse, whether you're doing groundwork with your horse, whether you're just going to say hi. And it's really like having me in your pocket. You can do it when you're sitting in your car, before you get out of the car. You could do it at home if you're, before you drive to the barn. But anyone who's interested, you're an equestrian who's intrigued, you want to learn more, that's a really great place to start. And certainly I'm put it in the chat, emotional. And
there's, I'm just going to go and pull up oh
no, I'm spelling it wrong. Emotional, no, 2 T's. I think I spelled it right. Fearless and typing, not my skill set. Fearless and free. There we go.
And I just found a link. I'll just pop this in. Best 10 EFT books.
Love it.
For people who like to read. Tells you EFT. So yeah, there's lots of resources and ways that, and we'll make sure that gets up into the notes. Yeah.
And come find me. I'm very easy to find. I'm on Instagram, Sarah Louise Lilley. And if you have questions and people want to reach out, like, as I said, I love nerding out about the science and why it works. And I love to talk tapping anytime. So,
well, and somebody's asked, have you tried it on horses?
Yes. So, it's acupressure, right? So I don't do a lot of tapping on horses. There are people who are much more skilled in that area than I am. I do transpose some of the face point. So I tap on the poll of my horse and she really loves that. I tap the stomach meridian, which is under the eye on her. She really likes that. So I do a little bit of tapping on my own horse. But yeah, it's the same points that you use in acupuncture. So you can absolutely tap on your horse.
Right. And it probably is a question of just grading the tapping to what the horse
likes, 100%.
Right? You can't just go in and go, I'm going to tap on your face and they're all going to be happy about it.
100%. Yeah, I tried the mouth point. She's not like that, but she loves the pole. She loves under her eye. So I do those, but yeah, other points, there's no consent there. That's fine.
Well, and that's where the Tellington Jones T-Touch can be so handy, because I think in so many ways, Linda has tapped literally, pun intended, tapped into ways in which, like with the T-Touch and the mouth work and the face work and the ear work, is you getting a similar effect.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, she loves the ears. She loves the ears. She's just
Awesome. Well, this has been really great. Thank you, Sarah, for joining me. It's been quite fun, and reminds me, because it's been a long time since I did any tapping. But
well, thank you so much for having me. It's been such a fun conversation, and I just appreciate all you do for riders and horses in the equestrian community. So I just want to publicly say, on behalf of everyone, just thank you for all you do for providing so many great resources for everyone. So thank you.
Thanks. Really appreciate that. All right. And until next time, everybody, have a great day. And again, Sarah, thank you so much for joining me today. Okay.
Bye, everyone.